Jarvis? I'm looking for Tony.
Ah, sweet Catherine. Looking for Tony, are you? My, what a pleasant surprise for him. Tell me, my dear, have you tried your own home?
I am home.
Well, a double surprise.
Hello and welcome to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast for all your Columbo needs. I'm Rich Nocella.
I'm Adrienne Nocella.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about The Greenhouse Jungle, 1972. Starring Peter Falk, of course, as Columbo, Ray Milland as Jarvis Goodland, the uncle of the victim and orchid fancier, Bradford Dillman as the loser and victim, Tony Goodland, and William Smith as a life support system for a chin.
Is he an actor anywhere else? Oh,
he's done like 250 things. You know what he is? He's on almost anything that ever existed as the handsome tough guy, but almost never the star. I mean, he's been you know what he was the star in for a while is Rich Man Poor Man. And he had a bigger, more important role in that, and that was kind of like I don't want to say soap opera, but it was a like Centennial. It was a long miniseries.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that at all, but I get it. I mean, he's pretty handsome.
I mean, I'm joking about the chin, but I'd kill for a chin like that.
My goodness.
Or at least, not having three of them anyway. So now this is interesting because, of course, the murder is delayed, so Columbo joins much sooner. They've kind of flipped things around a little bit.
Yes.
Well, we're only 9 minutes BC. Columbo comes in pretty early here. We have the episode starting with Kathy Goodland, the wife of the victim, being woken up by a phone call. And it is so obviously Ray Milland trying to put on a funny voice that I don't know how. I mean, she's supposed to not know who it is, but it's really just if it without the tissue over the phone, it's just Ray Milland.
Right.
They did that on a lot of shows that was famously made fun of on the TV show Police Squad, where the detective would put a handkerchief over the phone, speak in his normal voice, and it would sound like a completely different voice over the phone, because that's what they would do to try and muffle their voice on all these old shows. The phone call says, hey, basically, we've got your husband, he's got to pay up, and that's all there was to it. Hey, check on your husband.
Right.
And she gets up, and the first thing is, it's actually pretty subtle in the sense that we realize they have separate bedrooms. Plenty of people have separate bedrooms and it's fine, but on TV it was kind of relevant. So she got up, walked to the other bedroom and saw he was gone.
Right.
That's after we get a wonderful close-up of a headshot of the actor.
Well, the headshots just, so great. They do a lot of headshots in Columbo. I didn't realize how many.
Right.
The idea of having an 8x10 framed portrait of your face.
Yes.
And in this one, Tony signs it with love. Tony, to his own wife?
To his wife? Why would you autograph a picture to your wife?
I love it. But yeah, so he's got his headshot on her end table, and then she runs into the other bedroom, which looking for Tony. So that is for us as an audience to realize that they do sleep in separate bedrooms.
Right. That there may be a little bit more of a problem here. And if that wasn't enough, she then immediately calls who we think is the husband's mistress to see if he's over there. And the mistress has a headshot autographed to her. She,
too, has a headshot of Tony. It's the same exact picture in a framed portrait. And I got to tell you, if my lover gave me a framed portrait of himself, he would no longer be my lover.
Yeah,
what are you doing with that? And she's just like reading a book, cozied up to it, and like looking longingly at his photo. It's hilarious. I love it. I love this whole. I don't know like why those are included, but I guess it's just a shortcut for the audience for us to know that he has a relationship both with his wife and this blonde.
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely a shortcut because even in other episodes, it's a way for us to know that they're talking about a character who isn't in the room. We'd actually seen his picture more than him by this point because we haven't even seen him yet. And so when we finally do see him, Ray Milland, who's playing Jarvis Goodland, is talking to Bradford Dillman as Tony Goodland, his nephew. An almost immediate fake out when Ray Milland picks up a gun and turns around and basically points it at his nephew.
Yeah.
And we think he's going to kill him. We think, oh, this is the murder already.
Right.
It's not. He just kind of then puts it away and gestures with it. I mean, he's using it as a pointer throughout most of this beginning part of the show.
Right.
And so their first step on a multi-step plan is to wreck a Jaguar. But I guess we could back up and just say, hey, let's just talk about what the actual plan is.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about the plan because Uncle Jarvis does spell it out for not only his nephew, who's a full-on idiot, he also spells it out for us.
Yes. So the nephew, Tony Goodland, had a trust fund set up by his father, Jarvis's brother. And because Tony's father obviously knew that Tony was kind of a dope, he wanted to protect him by having this trust fund set up that he couldn't really tap into. He would get, I guess, a monthly allowance or through the bank, not unsubstantial. It was, they didn't say what it was, but it was still, he'd get a regular amount of money. The uncle approached Tony to try and break the trust because there is an emergency clause that as long as the uncle, who was kind of put in charge of the trust with the bank, agrees to it, they can tap into that trust. And that's why they'd staged this fake kidnapping, essentially. Right. That's what the plan is. As far as Tony is concerned, he's going to pretend to be kidnapped, receive the ransom money, and all of a sudden have this windfall of money that normally he would only get pocketed out in small amounts. And now he's going to get one big lump sum that he'll split with his uncle for helping him to break this trust.
Right.
That's the plan, and it's not a bad plan. A lot of moving parts, but it's still not a bad plan. Now that we know what they're trying to do, we see them set up an alleged crime scene. Tony's Jaguar, this yellow Jaguar, is driven to the edge of a cliff. Jarvis just runs through a whole laundry list of things he's supposed to do to set the time that this was supposed to happen.
Headlights off. I know. Dashboard clock set back to 12:18. Windows up. Emergency brake off?
Yes. Flaps up, wheels down.
Yeah, and by the way, Tony is not like a 21-year-old man. He's 35.
That's what I wanted to get to, because I know that we talked about that with the Roddy McDowell episode, is how old is he supposed to be? He's 35. I don't know. Was that mentioned in the episode?
It was mentioned on the police scanner. So I guess we're jumping ahead a bit. But so the idea is that they pushed the Jaguar to the edge of this cliff to have us to set up the scene for the site of the abduction, for the kidnapping, correct?
Right. Okay. Yes, after Ray Milland fires a shot into it.
Okay.
Because that was both part of what was setting up the thing and also part of how he made a mistake. So now the Jaguar is at the bottom of a cliff. They retreat to some place, I guess where it is irrelevant. It's just some kind of out-of-the-way cabin where Tony is set up to just kind of stay there for a while until the events unfold. They had like skins hanging up and things like that. And that's just it. That's his only role, was to wait there until the ransom drop-off, and then to wait there after the ransom drop-off until he could be released and ride in on the rescue with, now he would hide the money from anyone else. I don't know what their plan was supposed to be after the fact. We'll get into Tony's motive in a little bit. But as I'm sure everyone who's listening to this knows, Jarvis changed the plan. So what we have now, the Jaguar is found at the bottom of a ravine, and Columbo just now pulls onto the scene. So we're only 9 minutes into the episode, and Columbo's already on the scene of the Jaguar.
Police Department, Lieutenant Columbo. Would you mind if I came in?
They don't have a body because there hasn't been a murder yet.
Right.
But we have a Jaguar at the bottom of a ravine with a bullet hole in it. And we meet Detective Sergeant Frederick Wilson. He's meant to be, I guess, like the new style police, with all the newfangled gadgets and things that he can use. At one point, he sets up a camera with a telescopic starlight scope, which would just basically take pictures at night.
He's got metal detectors. I think he's supposed to be like a hotshot, recent police academy graduate.
Yes.
Even though he's about the same age as Peter Falk.
He did go through his resume, and it was fairly extensive, but he's obviously still new to homicide.
Yes.
Find out that Captain Ritchie, the police captain, basically sicked this guy Wilson onto Columbo. I don't know if he wants Wilson to rub off on Columbo or Columbo to rub off on Wilson.
Yeah, that is a question. I did think about that. What was the motive there? Maybe knock some of the enthusiasm out of Wilson.
Maybe.
Maybe just be like, okay, this is all great that you have all these technological advances, but there is still some real value in genius, because no one else is like a lieutenant like Columbo either,
That's true, too. Columbo can't really teach anybody what he does.
No.
So, of course, one of my favorite moments in all of Columbo was when they're going down to the car, and Detective Sergeant Wilson says, here, this is the quickest way down.
Yep.
And so Columbo starts to walk down the hill, and then immediately momentum and gravity take over. He's flailing his arms, he's running, he's going head first, and he absolutely, completely wipes out at the bottom of the ravine.
So that's been a meme in recent years. Have you seen this?
It's
been a meme. Yeah. So it's funny because people, they know I love Columbo, so they'll always send it to me. They're like, do you know what this is from? I'm like, they're like, I know it's Columbo. Yes. I'm like, I know precisely where this is from. But it always cracks me up because I do think Peter Falk absolutely wiped out. I don't think that was stage stunting.
Right.
Falling. I think Peter Falk did really lose a little bit of control near the end and absolutely legitimately wiped out and fell.
Yeah, and whether he thought, hey, this would be funny, let me do that, or whether it happened, I guess we may never know that.
I don't know, man. The look on Peter Falk's face, I think maybe it started off that way, and then it's like, oh, I went a little too far for a joke, because right midway down, if you look at Peter Falk's eyes, I'm like, oh, he cannot stop himself right now.
He really can't stop. He says, well, that was the quickest way down.
Yeah.
One of the things that I jotted down after watching this is because the sergeant, of course, he's rattling off a whole list of things like, oh, the bullet wound did this and that, and then just rattling through everything. And one of the things he rattles through is that 2 juveniles found the car while taking a shortcut to school. And I'm thinking, where did they live? And what school were they going to that they take a shortcut through that ravine where there's literally nothing as far as the eye can see? That just struck me as something that made sense on paper, but then that location would not.
I missed that. That's really funny. I actually went back and watched why the police were even looking for anything in the first place. And I did go back and watch this section twice, is that when Kathy called Ray Milland looking for Tony, because after she got the initial phone call, she called his mistress, and then she did call Uncle Jarvis looking for Tony.
Right.
And they had a conversation, and, Uncle Jarvis is pretty nasty to Kathy. He did say, look, if you don't hear from your idiot husband in an hour, call the police. So Jarvis did request to call the police, because that's how I heard on the police scanner that they were looking for Anthony Goodwin, 35-year-old male in a yellow sports car. So that's why they were even looking for a sports car with his plates, which was then discovered by, I guess, children who live in the woods. I don't know where they were going.
I guess it was from Malachi and everyone else in Children of the Corn, just trying to get to school or something. The next scene is Columbo looking at everything and basically telling Sergeant Wilson, hey, you stay here and gather more evidence. I'll go ahead and check with the relatives. And so we see Jarvis there. We see Catherine Goodland, the wife. They're acting very cagey. Mm-hmm. Columbo's telling them some pretty important information at the scene, and the wife isn't reacting at all. And she doesn't even want to talk to him. She didn't even want to let him into the house.
Right, because Columbo was making a house call to say, listen, we discovered your husband's car at the bottom of a ravine.
Right, you called us to look for him, and we found his car with a bullet hole in it. Yeah.
Right.
And she's just not saying anything.
It's just crickets, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's when Columbo, maybe not for the first time, but certainly many times after, said, if it was me and somebody told my wife that my car was found in a ravine with a bullet hole in it, that she might ask, gee, is he okay?
Right.
And that's when he basically gets them to admit that there has been a kidnapping attempt. And that we find out that there is a ransom note. I guess we should mention that Jarvis is already just being a complete jerk to Columbo, almost to the level of Cassidy in Murder by the Book. That he's just being condescending. He's just being a condescending ass, really, to everybody.
He's awful. He has a horrible personality in this episode.
Columbo is already a little suspicious, but I don't think of who yet. So this is where Columbo finds out about the trust fund, how much money the kidnappers are asking for,
Right.
and that it is possible to get their hands on that kind of money because they can break the trust fund in an emergency clause. And I found this episode very strange tonally because they're talking about her husband being kidnapped, possibly killed, ransoming for $300,000, and Catherine's just like, "Oh, Uncle Jarvis over here," and Uncle Jarvis is like, "Nah, you spendthrift." It's like, what? This is such a strange way for them to be acting under the circumstances.
Because honestly, even though Tony is sort of a nitwit, he's the only likable one in the entire episode. They're all not great people. So it is tonally off, but I guess it's to sort of hammer home the fact that Tony's wife, Catherine, and him don't really have the best marriage.
Right.
And that Jarvis is just putting up with, I don't know what he's doing.
I guess he's putting up with everybody in the hopes of getting the money. I mean, he clearly despises Tony. He despises Catherine. He just wants all that money from the family. I mean, he's obviously incredibly wealthy with the house he lives in.
Yeah.
But I guess he blew it all on orchids. I mean, that's what...
Yeah, it was just very strange. Yeah, I guess that's his motive. He needs to keep his orchid farm.
To keep himself an orchid. So we find out Ken Nichols comes in. He's friend of the family,
right,
and is kissing Catherine, the wife, whilst he's finding out that her husband has been, kidnapped, and they found a car at the bottom of a ravine. And she gets incredibly defensive. It's funny how many times in this episode they have her say, "I don't care what you think, Columbo," when she so clearly, obviously cares what he thinks.
100% cares because she's so rattled by it. She definitely cares. And that I did want to come back to what you were saying, where this is where Columbo found out about the trust. You're right. I wasn't sure if he suspected either one of them, but he did say something like, "Oh, so you can access that money. That's good luck, isn't it?"
And at that very brief moment, now we know Ray Milland's involved. We know that the wife is innocent, just a lousy person, but innocent of any of this.
Right.
But in that moment, I think you could make an argument that Columbo was thinking either one of them could have been responsible for this.
Well, absolutely. And it's interesting because Jarvis is being such a jerk and sort of like not rattled by this kidnapping. But as an audience, I was thinking, oh, maybe because he knows he's alive still, so he's not really all that concerned.
Until a little bit later on.
Until that changed.
That changes immediately because the very next scene, Columbo is hiding in Jarvis's orchid room. It's funny they call it the greenhouse jungle, but when Columbo says greenhouse, he immediately is corrected to say solarium.
Yeah.
So it's not even technically a greenhouse.
I saw that.
That's when we find out that these orchids are incredibly expensive, that one flower that he was looking at happened to be $1,200 for one flower.
Which is $8,000 in today's money.
Wow, so that's a lot of money for one flower.
Yes, and his solarium, not greenhouse, is filled with them. I mean, they're lousy with orchids.
Interesting. We actually see, because this was not him and Cassavetes talking, last episode where a lot of ad-libbed and a lot of kind of street talk type of stuff, we actually see much more of a humorous Columbo again for this episode.
Yes.
But even so, Jarvis was treating him so poorly that he was completely interrupting Columbo. Every time Columbo would say, "Oh, my wife would love if I could bring home a flower like that. Flower costs $1,200." Just completely interrupting him. Every time he opened his mouth, practically.
Right.
But then Columbo did get in a little Columbo bomb, just very subtle. But he said, "A fella could go broke with a hobby like this."
Yes, I heard that. That was great.
That's already going to be my bid for when Columbo decided which of the two is more likely to be. And then at the end of that, and that's why I made that point about how this changes, he made a point to tell Columbo how much he despises his nephew, including using the word despise. I despise my nephew for years.
I know. I actually wrote that down. I'm like, why? It's funny because Jarvis, for no reason, made it clear that he has a motive.
Yes.
He's like, I truly hate my nephew.
Yeah.
And no one asked.
No, nobody
Columbo
asked.
didn't say, well, what's your relationship like with your nephew?
Yeah.
He's like, Columbo was on his way out the door, and he's like, Jarvis did one more thing.
Yeah.
I despise my nephew.
Yeah. So Columbo had commented that he knew where to meet Jarvis in the solarium/greenhouse because people told him that's where he went, and he hadn't gone to the bank yet. So Columbo had said, oh, he just commented that Jarvis had stopped off at the nursery before going to the bank. And in the middle of getting a ransom and all of this, he just found that strange. And that's when Columbo was going to walk out. That was going to be his second Columbo bomb. And Jarvis interrupted him by saying, no, let me make me look even worse.
Yeah.
Let me not explain that I had to come here because I was worried about my flowers and that I knew the bank, blah, blah, blah. It's just saying, oh, I think you should know, Lieutenant, I absolutely despise this man that I'm going to kill in a little while. So when you find his dead body, I now have a double motive.
Yes.
There was no need for it. And then Ray Milland's face at the end of that scene before they faded to black, he put on a look like, ooh, was that a mistake? I mean, obviously, yes. But I don't know if he's just so full of himself that he had to tell the lieutenant that he hated him, or if he was more upset that, ooh, Columbo, I think, may already be on to me because he asked me about the bank. He made that comment about the orchids. He may have done a Jack Cassidy where it's like, oh, maybe he isn't so stupid already.
He had a worried look on his face. I actually didn't understand Jarvis's plan in this respect. Him and Tony are doing a fake kidnapping to get ransom money. That's the plan. It's pretty simple. Right. But part of the plan to make it very complicated was that Jarvis wanted to make sure that the police were involved from the beginning, which is why he told Catherine to call.
Right.
He staged a bunch of it very carefully to leave a lot of clues behind to make sure that the police were also involved. And then he's openly discussing his hatred for the kidnapping victim, which would be a motive because Jarvis's money is tied to his nephew's money. So that is a motive. So I didn't understand why he really invited all of that police attention in. I didn't understand this at all, honestly, why he didn't just go through with it and not then highlight everything.
Yeah, because he could have just done the entire plan without the police. And then when the dead body was found, he could say, we were told not to go to the police. If we did, he'd kill him, and they killed him anyway. Let's turn this all over to you folks. He didn't have to do any of that. But then I guess it would have been a little more typical Columbo because there would have just been a body and Columbo would have tried to find the mistake. But I think it would have been a lot harder to find mistakes if he didn't make so many of them. So I guess the real answer is the plan did not have to involve the police that much, but he had to for the sake of the show.
Right,
Speaking of the ransom drop-off, which was intentionally staged in an open area that could be witnessed by the police who he knew would be following, even though he asked them not to, a lot of 3D chess that really just amounted to checkers.
Correct.
That was kind of the closest to a car chase that we see in a Columbo. It's basically just them following him, leisurely driving, but with chase music playing.
The next scene is they've arranged for the ransom drop-off, which is at the top of like an open field, right?
Right.
And so Tony is now leaving the hideout to pick up the ransom from Jarvis, with the police following behind, and everyone knows that the police are there. And Tony shows up with the world's worst mask. So as bad
it's
as
just a stocking mask.
It's a stocking and it looks exactly like him. So as much as Jarvis disguised his voice by putting a handkerchief over the phone, that's how good of a disguise Tony had as a kidnapper. So he just put a stocking cap on his face. It looks exactly like him. It's in his own clothes, in his style. And so he grabs the ransom money. He runs off. Jarvis leaves. And they have a meetup point where Tony hops back into the trunk with the ransom money, and the two of them are now getting away to their getaway.
Right. And let's just back up just a little bit because this is all set in motion by Tony calling the house and Jarvis telling Catherine, you better answer the phone. Well, either one of them could, but of course he wanted her to answer the phone so she could hear Tony.
Yes.
Why was Tony pretending to be so hurt?
Because he was kidnapped and he was just selling it.
I guess it just seems strange. Like, why would they hurt him? Either they're going to release him after the money, or they're going to kill him. It just was strange that he was doing that little bit of acting, but maybe he just felt it was necessary.
They abducted him with the obviously there was a shootout, so these guys meant business because there was a bullet hole in his car, so maybe they roughed him up then. I don't know. Okay, maybe they roughed him up to get him into their car, perhaps. Yeah. I don't know. But here's the part that I really didn't get, because when he told his wife Catherine, okay, meet me at this gas station, and so Ray Milland takes the money, goes to the gas station. Ray Milland is talking to Tony on the phone at that gas station to tell him to go to the next place. Yes.
Why? Why didn't they just do it to begin with? Because there's no reason. There's the only two of them involved, right. Unless you wanted to make it look like, oh, these guys are leading me on a merry chase here, but he still only went to one other place.
I think it was meet me at the contact. I'll call you at the contact place to tell you where to drop it off. It doesn't make sense only because Jarvis knew that the police were going to follow him.
Right.
If he thought he was going to try and lose the police, then that would make a little more sense. It's like, let's stall them off a little bit. They don't know where I'm going to drive afterwards. But it's not like I don't think they tapped that phone call to the gas station, did they?
No,
because they just tapped the phone call to the house.
They technically didn't know where that phone was going to be because they just followed Ray Milland.
I don't know.
Apparently without Ray Milland knowing it. But, I mean, he did, of course.
Right.
But, like, their idea was they were going to follow Jarvis to the drop-off point.
Right.
And he stopped at the gas station, got another phone call where, again, Tony was talking as though he was injured to Jarvis. And it's like, what?
Do you know what's funny? Actually, that first phone call, he's like, it took you long enough. And then Jarvis was like, basically, watch it because someone may be listening.
Right.
So then Tony went right back into character of being a kidnapped victim. The whole thing was it was a little weird. I don't know if it's weird is the right word, but it was a little, I didn't understand. It didn't make a lot of sense to me.
It was off. It's almost like they said, hey, this is what a ransom drop is supposed to look like, so let's act this way.
Yes.
Forgetting briefly that this was a Columbo and there was no actual ransom.
Right.
So all right. So that's when we find out that they're at the drop-off. You're right. He gives them the money. They take the photographs. It was another funny moment when the Sergeant Wilson was telling Columbo how he paid for this really expensive camera and attachments with his own money, and Columbo said, "You must be a bachelor."
Yeah, funny.
And only now, when they get back to that cabin in the woods with everything done, and another really great moment because Jarvis is just getting everything ready. And so Tony got out of the car with the suitcase, but without his mask. Yes. And then Jarvis looked in the car trunk where he was hiding briefly, took the mask out, completely disgusted, slammed the trunk down. And he never said it, but that's because he's such a good actor, he didn't have to. Right. You could tell everything in his mind was this idiot even left the mask that he wore in a kidnapping in the trunk of my car, this moron. And so he walked inside and threw it on the ground in disgust while Tony was happily counting the money.
Right.
And now at 37 minutes in, the actual murder takes place. Tony is very happy about the money and no indication that he was going to try and cut Jarvis off. Instead, Tony was following the plan. And then Jarvis said, oops, here's the last part of the plan, and shoots him.
Yes. And I have a question about Jarvis's plan.
Yes.
Because the ransom, which was $300,000, which is $2 million today's money.
That's a lot of money.
But also for the lifestyle they're leading and all of those houses, I feel like that's not as much money as I don't think it's anywhere near enough.
I don't
it's
think
only $2 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But my question to you is, I didn't know if it was the entire trust or just part of the trust. I didn't know if that was the entire inheritance or part of it, because as the surviving widow, wouldn't Catherine still inherit money?
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't, you know what? I take that back, because we don't know what the terms of the trust were. If Tony's father thought he's probably going to grow up to be an adult loser and marry poorly. Yeah. So this trust is going to be set up that the money will only go to him, and should he die before the trust is completed, then it goes to my brother good old trustworthy Jarvis. So I don't know.
That would make sense.
We don't actually know that. But the house would certainly be hers. So if that house was paid off, that would be hers. You know, she would get a lot.
I mean, they have a yacht.
Yeah.
In this episode, you know, she's got a yacht. Yes. She's got a house. I was just surprised because I'm like, I don't really understand because she survives him.
Yes.
So if there's any money left over, I would think it would go to her. But you're right, because Jarvis did make a point to say in front of Columbo that there's so many provisions put upon this trust that the only way to break it is with this emergency situation.
Right. And that's what we don't know. We don't know if Jarvis said, okay, there's $350,000 in the trust. Let's do a ransom for $300,000.
Yeah.
We don't know if there's, $1,019,72 in trust. Let's just take a third of it. And then with Tony still thinking he'd live through this, he'd be like, I can still get my inheritance. I could still get my allowance every month, but have this extra money up front, So we don't really know. And I guess ultimately it doesn't truly matter, except it seems like the lifestyle they're living, it would only be worth killing your nephew for like 10 million, 20 million. It just doesn't seem like it's enough.
It's not a lot of money because even though Jarvis knows he's going to take all of the money, which is $300,000, 1972 money, Tony thinks they're splitting it. So now Tony's cut is only $150K, which is $1 million.
Right.
So that's only his cut is $1 million.
That's right.
So this seems like an awful lot of
Well,
effort.
Don't forget, because we're going to get into Tony's motive for even wanting to do this later. Tony didn't need that much. He just needed a certain amount of money up front.
Right.
And we'll get to that. But I'm sure he'd be thrilled to then have that extra money because he was going to buy his receptionist a car. He was going to, he was going to spend it almost immediately as he got it. I mean,
which is why it should be in a trust for him.
Yes, and that's why it wasn't a trust. That's why it was a trust, because he's an idiot. So Columbo again shows up in the solarium with an extremely dead African violet.
Yes.
And that's
it's just like it's a shriveled root. It looks like what witches use in potions. Like it does not look like anybody's house plant.
No, and it is funny because he does wind up reviving it, but there was no saving that. Columbo is there, of course, talking to Jarvis, and Jarvis is making the classic Columbo mistake of actually answering a lot of questions that Columbo was giving him.
Yes.
Like, why did the kidnapper call when they sent a note?
It's a good question.
That's a really good question. And so Jarvis said, well, his wife needs a lot of convincing to even believe it. She would get the note and not even believe it. And that's when Columbo would say, well, how would they know that? And every time Jarvis says something disparaging about Catherine, that's why they chose me to deliver the ransom money instead of her. Oh, well, she would drive away with the money. Well, how did they know that? So it's just very clear. He's continuing to answer these questions, and it's just making it so much more worse for him.
Yes.
And this is where we find out that there was an old robbery a year ago. Jarvis shot a couple of times at a robber as they were leaving and didn't hit them, but that obviously is going to be important later. But that's where we find out about that important information. And Columbo even makes a point, and you had even said this before, there are too many clues. He said, no, sometimes we don't get any clues. Now we have too many clues.
Right. And that still goes back to my question. These are my two overriding questions from this episode is the inheritance with Catherine. But my bigger question is, why did Jarvis want so much police involvement? I couldn't.
Yeah.
But your answer is correct. It's for the episode.
So there were too many clues. And then when they found the body in that cabin, and I'm not sure, did they ever say how they found that body in the cabin?
This is actually a plot hole as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Because after the drop off of the ransom money, they were following Jarvis. However, they didn't spot Tony jumping into the trunk of his car.
Right.
Okay. And then they were still following Jarvis on his way to their hideout.
Right.
He gets pulled over, he gets questioned, and they let him go, but then they stop following him.
Right.
Which is why he's able to get to the hideout in the first place, which is where the murder occurs. And then you're right. When they discover the body, there's no explanation as to how they stumbled upon the hideout now.
Right. Yeah, there were no two juveniles trying to go to school cutting through a cabin in the woods.
Right.
They just suddenly they're in the cabin with the body. That struck me as funny.
Lieutenant, as you've probably noticed, there are 3 cups, 3 plates, 3 different brands of cigarettes. That means there were 2 persons here besides the victim. That's obvious.
Yeah. Awfully obvious.
He knows he's being led down that garden path, and the sergeant is happily skipping along that path. And meanwhile, Columbo's like, you know that we're being led down this garden path.
Right.
Basically.
I don't need a metal detector to tell me that we're riding on this path right now.
So this is the part that is also then odd. Columbo is now going to the receptionist. He just wanted to find out if the victim, Tony, was the kind of guy who would set up a fake kidnapping. That's why he was asking the person who we all thought was his mistress, only to find out that she wasn't really a mistress.
Yeah, but I'm going to call out on that. That's another conversation because she did drop a hint that they actually were lovers later.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is all very confusing.
So anyway, the character's name is Gloria West.
Yes.
And so she tells Columbo that Tony would come to visit her at night to make his wife jealous and to make it seem like he didn't care that his wife Catherine was having an affair.
Right.
And so he would just basically get drunk and talk all night.
Yes.
And part of what was revealed, and this is where we finally get Tony's motive for all of this, is that the wife's lover, that Tony actually approached, Ken Nichols, and said that basically Ken was willing to take a bribe of $50,000 to disappear. That he would go away, he would stop seeing the wife for $50,000. And that makes me think that this was obviously, he wasn't just a, hey, I'm sleeping with the ski instructor, that this was obviously a relationship that she pretty deeply into.
But they stated that Gloria did say to Columbo that Tony's wife played around on him, and so he would come over and get upset about that and drink and make drunken phone calls from Gloria's apartment to be like, I'm having an affair too, haha.
Right.
And then she said, but what happened recently, she got pretty serious about one guy.
Okay.
And Gloria did state that, and that is Ken. But then I don't know how serious Ken was about Catherine if he's willing to take a bribe.
No, I think it's pretty clear that although she was falling for Ken,
Yes.
basically if Catherine was being a gold digger to Tony,
Yes.
then Ken was being a fortune hunter to Catherine. Because clearly that was true. He was willing to leave for $50,000 because that is the next scene. Columbo joins them on their yacht.
Yes.
Where she again says, he's now from the morality police. This, that. I don't care what you think, but I'm going to go on for 15 minutes about how I don't care what you think.
Right.
And then Columbo really maliciously, for no reason at all, I mean, he had no reason to do this. It had no bearing on the case. Did he just have enough of being preached to by this woman that he had to take her down a peg? Because he said, Gloria West said some guy with a tan, that he would be willing to leave for good for $50,000. And that's when we see Ken kind of wilt a little bit because he knows that he got caught. And we see Catherine kind of crestfallen that she realized that this gigolo really is a gigolo. So what did you think of that?
So I thought maybe it was like a little dig at her, but I also thought it was confirmation for us that actually is true, because one part that was a little confusing when you're watching it is that Columbo shows up to Gloria's apartment, and that's when she reluctantly reveals that Tony came into a lot of money and his marriage will be saved because he's going to pay off a fella who his wife got serious about. And she didn't really know at the time that this was how he was going to get that money. She just knew that he was going to have that money. However, once Columbo left, Gloria was still filmed in the apartment, and she made a phone call to Jarvis.
Yes.
And she sort of alluded to the fact of something going on. And as an audience member, I don't know what we knew was going on. So I also sort of thought that the reveal to Catherine about the fact that Ken actually did take that money, it wasn't Jarvis and Gloria working together and scheming together to frame them, that was really true. So as the audience, we were sort of clued into the fact that that was true. He really was taking that money, because she could have planted a false motive with Columbo, because Gloria was being very cagey with Columbo.
Yes, she was. And you think that, oh, maybe she's being a fake, scatterbrain.
Yes.
But she's apparently just a scatterbrain.
It was weird when Columbo left and she made that phone call. I wasn't sure as a viewer whether she planted a fake motive, whether she held back some truth, whether she just outright lied. And it could have been any of those things, which is why I also think it was just confirmed. It's like, oh no, Ken's going to take that money to leave Catherine alone. Yeah. So that part of it was actually true. So that's how I took it.
I think that's reasonable to say that. I know as an audience member, because don't forget, when Columbo left her and she made that phone call, the last thing he said was, whoever helped Tony break that trust is the one who killed him.
Yes.
And so she made the phone call to Jarvis, and I think we were supposed to think that she was going to blackmail Jarvis,
Absolutely.
that she figured it out, and that she was going to blackmail him, because that's the next scene. Miss West wants to meet Jarvis. She made that phone call. He basically said, hey, meet in my solarium at 2 a.m. or whenever it was. It was very early in the morning.
Yeah.
And she tells Jarvis what Columbo told her, and it's leading up to her revealing to him that she's figured it all out, and if you give me some money, I'll shut up about it. But then they subvert that. So that was very clever. They had a lot of episodes of Columbo where a blackmailer gets killed, and instead she wasn't a blackmailer. She just figured it out. She just figured it out wrong. Yeah. So another nice fake out. I mean, it's funny because Jarvis points a gun at literally every person in this episode practically. So he's pulling out the gun as Gloria West is saying, oh, Tony was shot with a .32. I remember he used to have a .32 caliber gun, and I remember who he gave it to. And as Jarvis is pulling the gun out of his drawer, saying, oh, and who was that? She said, his wife.
Right.
And so he just, cha-ching, it all just went off in his eyes, because he then changed the plan on the spot. Yes. I guess it was just going to be an unsolved crime, but he realized that he can now pin this on Tony's wife, because that's what Gloria figured. Gloria thought, well, Tony and Catherine did this fake kidnapping to get you, innocent Uncle Jarvis, to break the trust, and then they were going to run off and split the money, and she killed him instead. Now, she's a dope because, as you said before, she probably would have inherited it. She didn't have to...
No.
She didn't have to do a lot of that stuff.
She didn't have to do anything because she was being taken care of and was allowed to have affairs. Like there was no money needed for her. The money was needed to get rid of her boyfriend.
Yeah, exactly. And she's the one who knew that.
Yes.
Like, Gloria's the one that knew that Tony needed the money to get rid of Catherine's boyfriend. So what did Catherine need to do?
Gloria put it together wrong. Gloria's wig put it together wrong. She got it all wrong. Gloria's wig confronted Jarvis's toupee. That's what that whole scene was about.
I think so. I think in a battle of wig versus toupee, the toupee won because she completely put that together wrong. Really, we're kind of winding things down here. Oh, the only thing that was also in it for Gloria was that, and this was a good point, that broken trust money did have a reward, a 10% reward associated with it. So she basically said, I came to you instead of the police because I'm going to put that gal in jail and get $30,000 to boot. And what she almost got, if she put it together right, she would have gotten a .32 caliber herself in the test. But thankfully, she was enough of a dope to save her life. And so he just escorted her out and said, believe me, you'll be the first to know, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And scoots her out, and you could just see the wheels spinning in his head.
Yes.
So really the last part of it is he swaps out the murder weapon that is in his solarium. He goes over to the main house and swaps out another .32 that she had. I mean, I guess they just had two guns. That was just little...
Yeah, I think Jarvis had a gun, and I think that, Gloria said that Tony did give his wife a gun. That's why she remembered it. She didn't make that up.
Yeah.
So Tony gave his wife a gun, so that's why there was a gun to swap out with.
And it just happened to be that they were both .32s, but that was convenient. And so they had this little fun, tense scene where he's in her bedroom and he keeps spinning around, pointing a gun at her. Like, how is he going to explain shooting her in bed? I mean, that it wasn't going to happen. But thankfully, we didn't have to worry about that. He didn't shoot her. He just stuck the gun in a bag of shoes.
Yes. In a shoe bag.
In a shoe bag. And so Columbo, who really hadn't had a lot to do lately, was just sitting down, and this may be the first time we see him eating chili. I can't remember if he did in season 1 or not. So he's at a countertop getting chili, and the sergeant pulls up with all kinds of policemen saying, aha, because Jarvis had pretended to find the gun and handed it over to Sergeant Wilson. He called Sergeant Wilson over at 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever, to say, hey, have your ballistics guys check this gun out. I think you'll find it's the murder weapon. And by the way, take my word for it, I found it at her house.
Right.
That's exactly what they're going to do. And Columbo says to the sergeant, tell you what, why don't you take over this part of the case? You go ahead and search the house, and if you find anything, let me know.
Right.
And he proceeds to eat his chili.
Right. He just sent him on his little task.
He sent him on the task because, again, like all good detectives, Sherlock Holmes had the Baker Street irregulars. They'd all do the grunt work.
Right.
He'd do the grunt work, bring him the info, and then he'd solve the case. So that's what he was doing. So we're finally in the little last moments here. The sergeant is there at Catherine's house. She even said, yeah, you didn't need a warrant. You could have just asked. And she can't produce the gun, which, again, why didn't he just put it right back in the drawer? She would have just said, hey, here's this 32, and they would have tested it and said, hey, thanks for the murder weapon. But he had to hide it.
Well, I guess to make it look like she would hide it.
Yeah.
To make her look more guilty because it was used in the murder.
You know what? That's fair. They search the house. They're breaking out metal detectors and searching everything. They're not finding it anywhere, including where we saw him hide the gun. So that was a nice little fake out because they did the metal detector over the shoes and it beeps. One of the other sergeants there pulls out the shoe and says, see metal shoe trees. And that's when, to Detective Sergeant Wilson's credit, he said, well, wait, did you search all of them? And he said, no need. And, we as an audience are thinking, yeah, there's a need. That's a place to search. And he, of course, finds the gun and then is going to bring her in to be arrested. And then they all are brought back to the solarium, very Hercule Poirot style of having a room, similar to the Suitable for Framing, where everybody is now there. And Columbo politely chides the Sergeant Wilson for trying to arrest her. Even though it basically said, yeah, this is your case. He then reveals that the gun that was hidden in Catherine's house was the gun that was fired into the Jag.
Yes. That
was found in Tony's body.
Yes.
But also fired the bullet a year ago into the dirt that was shot at the burglar in the solarium over a year ago.
Yes.
And that was the big error, was how is he going to explain how Catherine's gun was used to shoot at a couple of burglars?
In his solarium.
That was it. That was the episode. And Columbo did give Wilson a nice compliment saying, some of you have rubbed off on me. I like this. I never would have thought to use a metal detector. But that was really it. So I did like this episode quite a bit. I just thought it had some funny tonal shifts to it. I think that everybody was kind of acting like a cartoon character, but it somehow worked.
I like this episode a lot. I did like it.
This is the portion of our program where we try and decide, when did Columbo know?
How'd you know?
I suspected you 10 minutes after I met you.
I kind of already said it. I basically feel that his interest was very piqued when he found out that a trust fund could be broken, and that he really only knew when he found out about how expensive that orchid hobby is for Jarvis, and that's when he really focused much more attention on him.
Yeah, sometimes they hit you over the head with when he knows, but this one I think you could make an argument for both. But I was going to say, when Columbo said, oh, that's good luck, when he found out that you could break the trust, that's when he knew. But you bring up a good point about, well, I guess that could have been directed at Catherine or at Jarvis.
Yeah, and I don't know. I certainly, you know me, I feel he knows the second he walks on the scene. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't argue too hard against that.
Right.
But I could certainly say, well, not just good luck, but that Jarvis is technically the one who could break the trust. The wife can create a scenario where it could be broken, but Jarvis is the one who actually has the final say in whether it's broken.
Right.
So, I could also argue that he knew once he knew that, which is in that same scene. So,
I mean, let's face it, Columbo didn't show up and hide out in Catherine's solarium.
no.
He immediately went to hide out in Jarvis's solarium.
He didn't show up in her husband's bedroom where she wouldn't have noticed him for a week and a half.
No, it's so sad. Such a sad relationship.
This was actually very sad, kind of all the way around. Everybody was kind of pathetic in this episode.
Yeah.
The victim was very pathetic that he was going to do all of this just to pay a guy to leave his wife.
I know. That's how much
and
he loved his wife.
that's how much he loved her.
She's horrible. She's so mean. Like, she's not mean to him in that sense, but it's horribly awful to be in a, I don't know how to finish this sentence.
Well, no, because that's what she was saying. It's like, hey, we're a modern 1970s couple, and, I love my husband, but I'll just sleep with all these other guys, and,
And Tony's like, yes, that's what we're doing. While he's crying and drinking. He's like, that's what we are, a modern couple.
That's right. We're a modern couple. I'm going to pretend to be a modern couple at my receptionist's house.
Yeah, so that's the sad part. So who else is sad? Because I'd like
Well,
to
Ray Milland, he got to see his nephew grow up into this complete loser. I mean, he really said, I despised him over the past few years. But like you said, the guy's 35, so he must have at least, liked and respected him at some point. And he saw him fall apart like this over this woman who was not worth it. And that he himself got addicted to orchids. I mean, how, of all things.
That is a really good point. Like, Jarvis's motive is to get the money, and I think we are supposed to think it's to keep him in orchids. I think that's what we're supposed to think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they wanted to make it higher class than racehorses, where people really do lose their fortunes.
But that's more understandable.
Yes. And I think that's why they wanted to make him a little more elitist, to just say,
You know what's funny? With Ray Milland, I wasn't sure with his accent if he had like an English accent or just fancy old American money accent.
Right, okay.
I couldn't tell because he certainly doesn't have a Californian accent.
No.
So he is elitist. So it's like he is very, very, very fancy. So you are right. So I guess orchids is a rich man's hobby.
Well, just like in Short Fuse, the aunt of Roddy McDowell, she wasn't on a ballet board. She wasn't on the arts. She was on the opera board.
Yes.
So it's just that one layer more elite
you're right.
than even a stereotypical elite. So, of course, he would go bankrupt trying to keep himself in orchids.
In orchids. So Jarvis that's his sad thing. And then Catherine, I don't know. Is it just sad that her lover really only wanted her money?
I mean, I think so. I think it's sad that she behaved the way she did and then got an almost immediate karmic response that this other person that she was starting to love and feel that she had a relationship with was willing to leave for $50,000, which what would that be? Like $500,000? I mean,
no, it's not. It's $350,000. It's $350K.
So
I looked it up. That's $350,000. There are so many money conversions in this episode alone. I was like, should I just keep interrupting and tell you all the money, or should I just do a roundup at the end with all of the conversions? Because I did every single one. But yeah.
Well, anyone we left out. Go ahead.
I don't think so. Now I think we have which is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money to just say, okay, I'll find another rich woman to leech off of.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of money because he's a ski instructor.
Yeah. But on the other hand, it's not a lot of money if he's going to stay in the picture and continue to just use her yacht.
Well, that goes to her personality. Maybe that's why he's a true gigolo, right? I mean, if she's all indignant because Columbo's actually not accusing her of having an alternative lifestyle. Columbo made one look one time when Ken came in and made out with her in front of him while she was waiting for her husband's ransom information, right? So he made one look one time, and after that, she was like, "How dare you?" And he really didn't prompt any of that. No. Like you said, it's not a lot of money compared to if he stuck around, but maybe the guy didn't want to stick around.
Well, all right. So I think we're pretty close on when he knew, which was again right away, and it's just a matter of degree. But now it's time to rate our murderer on the sympathy scale, on the scale of Ruth Gordon being our most sympathetic killer to Dick Van Dyke being our most vicious killer.
I have this dream, Francis. I'm working. There's a phone call, and he says, terribly sorry, but your wife's dead. And then I always wake up, and I want to cry, because you're still alive.
Where would you put him?
I think he's pretty ruthless.
Yeah.
I think he's pretty ruthless. I don't think he's Dick Van Dyke was just mean, which is obviously on top of being ruthless, he was just cruel and mean, which is why he is the barometer, right? That's why he is the scale.
That's why he's the top end of the scale. He didn't just kill her, and he didn't just kill her for no reason. She was tied up, and he spent her last moments on Earth telling her how terrible she is and how happy he's going to be now that she's going to be dead, and then kills her. And that's why he is our high-end scale.
Okay, so Jarvis isn't that, but I think he's pretty close. He killed his nephew for a flower when he already has all of this money. I mean, his home is as luxurious as Catherine and Tony's home. So he has money. He has fancy clothes. He has a fancy pool table. He has it all. And he still killed his nephew for more. So that's pure greed. And he detests and loathes his nephew instead of really offering him care and comfort. So he's a pretty ruthless killer, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, if they had shown a scene where maybe they were going to repossess some of his orchids and he was desperate for money, but they didn't. I actually put him pretty close to Dick Van Dyke as far as that goes, because obviously an unlikable guy just right off the bat. He's just a jerk to everybody for no reason.
Yeah. And a windbag. He doesn't stop. He just keeps on going on and on and on about how much he doesn't like everybody. It's like, all right, we get it.
Yeah. I mean, he basically talked himself into being arrested practically. But yeah, no, look, he had an opportunity at some point to try and steer his nephew right, and instead, like you said, despised him.
Right.
Was never at all nice to his nephew's wife.
No.
Then there's good reason, but he still could have been civil, even to the point where Tony said, why do you have to keep talking to her like that? Well, because she's a terrible person, but then so is Jarvis. So I guess not to belabor it, I agree with you completely. I would put him just shy of Dick Van Dyke. I have no sympathy for him at all, and I don't think he was cruel, but I certainly think that he was, evil. I guess. I mean, he killed his basically last remaining relative.
He said his only relative.
Yes. He killed his only relative over flowers, and he still could have bought a lot of flowers for $1 million. He just wanted it all, so that was just pure greed.
You're right.
That's true.
You're right. He didn't have to kill him. He could have just kept his share. You're right. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, he could have kept $150,072.
Yes.
So he could have kept $1 million to buy all the orchids he wants, and then just maybe cry a little bit that his nephew blew that $1 million on stupid stuff. But the point is, it was never his. It was always supposed to be his nephew's. They could have done absolutely everything exactly the same, and then he just kept his share and let his nephew keep his share. Definitely full-blown, just shy Dick Van Dyke. We haven't had one of those in a while.
No.
So I guess now we get to, will it hold up in court?
Tell me, Doctor, how do you catch a man like that?
You don't?
You're probably right.
My opinion is yes.
Oh, I was agreeing, yes, that's a part of the show, but also, yes, I agree. I think this will completely hold up in court.
I mean, you have matching ballistics buried in a flower bed that Columbo himself dug up, and that those bullets match the one in the victim and at the fake crime scene, and that it was clearly planted in the other woman's house. So, I don't even think we have to go into that too much.
No, because normally a lot of this is circumstantial evidence and theory and things like this. This is physical evidence this time. So I would say, yes, it holds up.
So I guess there's nothing more to say then this has been another fun episode, and that we will join you next time.
Oh, one more thing.
Oh, yes.
So this episode was all about a kidnapping hoax. So what I did was looked into like famous kidnapping hoaxes throughout history.
Okay.
And a lot of kidnapping hoaxes are really sad. And then a lot of them are just honestly bored housewives that hate their husbands and they run away for a weekend, and there's really no ransom or anything. But I stumbled across one that I've never heard of before, and I thought it was so fascinating. So that's what I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
We're going to go back in time to the 1920s in Chicago. It was a hotbed for in the 20s in Chicago? Bootlegging.
Right, I was going to say prohibition. Yeah,
prohibition.
Yeah. Okay.
So the kingpin at that time was obviously Al Capone, really was running that city. But Al Capone wasn't thrilled because there was a gangster named Roger Toohey who was a really successful bootlegger in the 20s and 30s in Chicago. And Capone wanted it. He wanted that share. Now, for some reason, I don't understand at all. Instead of just killing him like Capone did to really everybody,
right,
he decided to hatch this elaborate scheme to frame Roger Toohey for kidnapping, to get him arrested. That was his scheme. So what Capone did actually was not try to frame Roger Toohey once for kidnapping, but actually twice. The first attempt was unsuccessful. What Capone did was there was a real kidnapping that happened. Another gang kidnapped a brewery heir. Capone paid off a bunch of people in the police to find evidence on Roger Toohey and his gang to frame him for this kidnapping. But when it went to trial, it fell apart in court because he didn't kidnap him, and they did find the gang who did kidnap this brewery heir. So that was unsuccessful.
Okay.
Exactly. So the whole thing fell apart in court, and Toohey was acquitted. So Capone, yet again, instead of just killing him and taking over his business, which he's certainly done many times.
He has a good track record.
Yes. He decided to frame him again, but this time, to control it more, he's framing him with this very elaborate, completely fake kidnapping. So now he stages this hugely elaborate scheme to kidnap Jake the Barber. Now,
Okay.
Jake the Barber is another con man, sort of a low-lying mobster himself. And what Jake the Barber did was he walked into the police station one day and said, "Hey, man, I was just kidnapped, and I just paid a $70,000 ransom, which in today's money is $1.5 million.
$1.5 million. Okay.
That's a lot of money. So 70 grand in 1934, which is when this was happening. So Jake the Barber walked into the police station, said he was kidnapped by Toohey and his gang. There was no evidence to support this fake kidnapping because the kidnapping didn't happen. There was no money exchanged. There was no ransom paid to anybody. But Toohey and his associates were found guilty in court because Jake the Barber and his fake witnesses said, "Oh yeah, this gang kidnapped him." And they were convicted and all sentenced to 99 years in prison.
So that worked.
So that one worked. Now, this is where it gets even better. In 1959, it was found that Toohey was wrongly incarcerated. His sentence was commuted. He was released 1 month after his release, being a free man in prison, wrongly convicted for 25 years for a fake kidnapping that didn't even happen. He was immediately gunned down in another mob hit. So Roger Toohey had the poor fortune of being a successful bootlegger in the 30s in Capone City. That's all that really happened. That's my fake kidnapping hoax story.
Well, I'm trying to think of which one went worse, this Columbo one or that.
So that's what I wanted to talk about. But yeah, this was a great episode. I'm trying to think what the third episode in season 2 is, but we'll certainly get to it next time when we talk about our Rumpled Trenchcoat podcast.
And one more thing.
Oh, yes.
So the last time Ray Milland was on Columbo, he played the husband of the victim. And I had talked about how the plot of that episode very closely mirrored a famous movie he was in called The Big Clock.
I remember.
Okay, so in this episode, the plot of this bears a lot of resemblance to another famous movie Ray Milland was in, Dial M for Murder.
Oh.
So what happened in Dial M for Murder, A man, Ray Milland, wants to murder his wife. He hires a hitman, kind of half hires, half extorts him, but she kills the hitman in self-defense. And so that plan fell completely apart.
Okay.
So he then had to improvise and change the plan to frame her for the murder. So instead of it being self-defense, he framed his wife to make it look like it was intentional murder.
Oh, okay.
And so now you see where I'm going.
Yeah.
In this episode, Ray Milland had a plan, and it was just simply fake kidnapping. We kill the guy, unsolved case.
Right.
He then saw an opportunity to completely change the entire plan to frame the wife so that he could get the money. So I know it's a little bit of a stretch, but I did feel as I was watching it, I thought, this is familiar. And then I remembered because Silent for Murder is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I just thought it was funny that, again, Ray Milland was in, and because he was such a big star, we can mention now that he did, in fact, win an Oscar for The Lost Weekend.
That's right. You know, it's so funny because I know I've seen Silent for Murder, but because you know how like how we talk about how we grew up, I saw it, I think I was like 7.
Right.
So I really don't remember that movie. I know I saw it. Is that Grace Kelly?
It was Grace Kelly who was the wife, absolutely, and Bob Cummings was the man that she was having an affair with.
Okay.
And Ray Milland was the husband who wanted to kill her for her money, because she was the one with the money. And a big part of it involved switching a key to get into the apartment, and he switched the murder weapon in an attempt to frame her in this episode as well. So I don't know, maybe a slight stretch, but I did think it was worth bringing up, because now, you know, Ray Milland's 2 for 2 on them taking pretty important elements of famous movies of his and incorporating it into the plot.
Yeah. Oh, that was great.
I think at this point we'll just say thank you again for listening. Had a great time, and our next episode will be The Most Crucial Game. And until then, you can follow us on Instagram at Rumpled Trenchcoat, on Twitter at Rumpled T, on Patreon and YouTube at Richard Nocella, Nocella. And until next time, it was the Rumpled of times, and it was the Trenchcoat of times.
Oh, no. That is spectacularly terrible.
Well, now I feel a lot better about that, because you liked the last one, and I couldn't let that stand. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Bye.